I boarded the ship on a lie that tasted like rust. The cutter that carried me in was not mine. It belonged to a scavenger guild that paid tribute to anyone with guns and a warp route. I wore their patched void suit, their cracked badge and their tired slouch. Even my breath was timed to their habit, short pulls through a filter that never quite worked. The guild's master had made the deal with my handlers, then died of an accident before he could regret it. That was mercy. Regret lasts longer than suffocation. Ahead of us, the Emperor's Children warship turned in the void like a blade being admired. Its hull was a cathedral of excess, not clean and proud like an Imperial cruiser, but layered with additions that looked welded on in moments of inspiration and madness. Spires, ribs, vents that should not exist, painted icons that shimmered even with no light source. It was ugly the way a wound is ugly, yet it demanded your eyes. My Auspex reader hissed at the edge of range. Not a warning, a craving. I muted it and swallowed down the instinct to look away. The scavenger captain hailed them on Vox. A voice answered that made my teeth ache. Permission granted. Docking claw assigned. Hold course. Do not speak unless spoken to. The captain laughed like this was a joke. I forced myself to laugh too. In my inner pocket was the real purpose of the mission, sealed in oilskin and prayer. A scrap of parchment that had passed through too many hands, each one afraid to keep it long. It named the thing I had come for, the Ledger of Canticles, a record of indulgence, tithes, pacts, favors, and debts the warship carried like a second spine. My warband wanted it because ledgers are weapons. They point you at the throat. My handlers called it a relic, not because it was holy, but because it was dangerous to touch. A second item rode beside it, smaller and worse. A coin of pale metal stamped with a single teardrop. A token for a silence window somewhere deep inside the ship. The note promised it would buy me 1 minute of quiet. That did not sound like much until you understood what lived on a Slaanesh ship. Silence is a shield. The docking bay doors irised open. Steam rolled out, thick as breath on a winter morning. I watched the vapor curl around the cutter and felt the hairs on my arms rise. It was not cold. It was anticipation. As we entered, the bay lights flickered through colors that had no name. The scavenger crew cheered. They thought it was a welcome. Servitors waited on the deck, their flesh wrapped in ribbons of cable. Not the clean, pitiful Imperial kind. These had been decorated. Smooth masks, jeweled implants, ports like piercings. One dragged a chain of chimes that rang when it moved. Another carried a brazier of incense that made my head swim. A squad of mortal armsmen watched us from a gantry. Their uniforms were a parody of discipline, polished plates over bare skin, helms with Vox grills shaped like smiling mouths. Their officer raised 2 fingers. The scavengers filed out. I moved with them, shoulders rounded, eyes down. Infiltration is not about hiding your body. It is about hiding your purpose. The first rule of the ship hit me before anyone spoke it. Attention is lethal. A robed figure approached, tall and thin. Not an Astartes, too slight. A ship clerk, maybe, or a cult official. Their robe was stitched with tiny bells that chimed with each step. The sound was soft, yet the bay fell quieter around it as if everyone's nerves had learned respect. Tribute, the clerk said. The scavenger captain handed over a crate of salvage, their bribes packed in foam. The clerk did not open it. They tapped the lid, then tapped the captain's chest. A servo skull drifted closer and sniffed him with a needle sensor. Acceptable, the clerk said. Follow the marked path. Do not leave it. Then the clerk looked at us, one by one. Their eyes lingered on my gloves, on my boots. On the way, I held my jaw. A long second passed. My throat tightened. 2 of you will be chosen for the choir, the clerk said, almost casually. If you are chosen, you will go without complaint. If you complain, you will still go. The scavengers muttered prayers. Someone crossed themselves in a half-remembered Imperial gesture. The clerk smiled like it was charming. I did not react. In my warband, we taught our agents to keep a dead face even when the world cracked. A bell rang. Not from the clerk, from the ship itself. A deep note that went into my bones. The marked path began at a strip of pale paint on the deck. It ran out of the bay like a throat leading into a stomach. The scavengers followed it. The armsmen watched, amused. As soon as we left the bay, the air changed. The The ship smelled of oil, sweat, and something sweet that made your mouth water even when you were not hungry. The corridor walls were covered in plaques that might once have been devotional, now scraped and repainted with swirling sigils. Vox speakers whispered behind vents, not words, breaths, giggles, a sigh that came back again and again like a lover repeating your name. I counted junctions, vents, cameras. My eyes moved, but my face stayed empty. A servitor passed us pushing a cart of tools. Its hands were delicate, almost artist's hands. It hummed to itself, a tune that slid out of key and back again. As it drew level with me, it turned its head and leaned close as if to share a secret. Its Vox grill clicked once, very softly. My inner pocket warmed. Not with heat, with sensation. I felt the oilskin press against my ribs like a palm. I kept walking. We reached a lift shaft guarded by another squad, this one wearing half helms so their expressions showed. They were too young, too thin, too eager. Their eyes glittered with a hunger that was not for food. One of them stopped a scavenger and asked his name. He answered. The guard repeated it, slowly, tasting it. Then he waved him through. When the guard looked at me, I dropped my gaze and said the name I had borrowed. He stepped closer. He did not touch me. He inhaled. I felt it then, like a needle behind my nose. A scent mark. A trace on my skin that was not mine. My handlers had warned me the ship could taste outsiders, not with machines, but with rituals and trained senses. I had scrubbed, bled, masked. It was not enough. The guard smiled. Hold, he said. My heart did not speed up. I refused it. Panic makes patterns. Patterns are readable. The guard leaned to the side and spoke into a vox bead. A quiet exchange, too low for me to catch. Then he nodded and stepped away. You may pass, he said, disappointment in his voice. Relief would have been a mistake. I filed that moment away. Someone had noticed. Someone had decided not to stop me. That was worse than a search. The lift shuddered upward. The scavengers joked to cover fear. I watched the indicator lights, memorizing deck numbers as they blinked past. Deck 47, bilge galleries. Deck 41, servitor vats. Deck 36, Militarum annex. Deck 30, crew quarters. The lift doors opened into a passage lit by strips of violet lumen that made skin look bruised. The marked path continued. On both sides were doorways, some sealed, some open. I caught glimpses as we passed. A mess hall where crew ate in silence while music played too loud. A corridor where men and women knelt before a mural made of broken mirrors. A med bay where an orderly wiped instruments that looked more like sculpting tools than medical gear. No one spoke to us, yet I felt watched from behind grills and peepholes. We reached the guild's assigned berth. A storage chamber with a line painted on the floor. The line had the same pale color as the path. Like bone, the clerk returned with a slate and began reading out tasks. The scavengers would strip a damaged heat exchanger. They would patch a ruptured coolant line. They would deliver a crate to Militarum annex. Then the clerk's eyes rose. 2 for the choir, they said. They pointed. Not at me. They chose a young scavenger with trembling hands and an older woman whose face went grey. The clerk's armsman took them without struggle. The young one tried to speak and could not. The older woman stared straight ahead. She had learned the second rule. On this ship, pleading is entertainment. The remaining scavengers were sent to work. I followed them, but I did not work. Not really. I watched. I listened. I learned the rhythm. The ship ran on schedules, yet the schedules were not written. They were sung. A bell tone meant change shift. A higher tone meant a patrol moved from one junction to the next. A soft sequence of chimes meant a corridor would be cleared soon for someone important. A sudden silence, sharp and unnatural, meant you were being tested. If you spoke in that silence, you were marked. I saw how the mortal crew survived, not by strength, by bargains. A man traded a ration bar for a strip of wax he pressed into his ears. A woman offered a vial of coolant for a pass token stamped with a teardrop. A boy showed another boy a scar on his wrist, then pointed at a vent. The second boy nodded and slipped into the vent like a rat. I caught words, whispered fast. Do not look up on the 9th hour. Never step on the gold line. If you hear singing behind you, Count to 10 and do not turn. I asked no questions. I did not need answers yet. My mission was not to save anyone. It was to steal. Still, a part of me recorded their rules with a kind of respect. Their courage was small, but it was real. By mid-shift, the first complication arrived. A procession passed, not of Astartes, but of attendants and banners. They carried lengths of cloth covered in stitched faces. The cloth brushed walls and left behind a faint shimmer that made my eyes blur. The crew pressed themselves flat, making themselves thin. At the center walked a figure in a smooth white mask, tall enough that the escort parted for him. He was not wearing power armor, yet his presence made the air feel heavy. A champion's favorite, perhaps, a mortal with status bought through cruelty. As he passed the scavenger crew, the white mask turned his head slightly, as if listening to our breathing. Then he lifted a hand and traced a shape in the air. The shape hung for a moment like a burn mark. Every guard nearby straightened. The clerk who had chosen the choir bowed. The white mask did not stop. He simply walked on, but something followed behind him like a wake, an ache at the edges of sound. When the procession vanished, the corridor's whispers returned. The crew exhaled in one shared motion. Someone murmured a name. The Pale Cantor. I stored it. Open loop. A name always means a place in the hierarchy. A second complication came soon after. My borrowed slate chirped with a work order. Deliver a crate to Militarum Annex. The scavengers groaned. Militarum meant guards, logs, and scrutiny. I lifted the crate with two others and followed the path. The crate was heavy and warm. It smelled faintly of incense. One of the scavengers made a joke about gifts for the lords. The other laughed too loud and earned a slap from a passing guard. We reached the annex at the end of a long corridor lined with trophies. Not weapons. Instruments. A shattered horn, a stringed device with snapped cables. A drum made from some kind of hide I did not want to identify. A sign was bolted to the wall, written in High Gothic with letters carved like knives. Measure your breath. Offer your work. Inside, a clerk took the crate and scanned our badges. His Auspex wand paused over me. Raise your hands, he said. I did. Slow, smooth. He circled me. The wand hummed. Then he tapped my collar and frowned. You have no scent chain, he said. My mind ran through options in a blink. Scent chain could be literal, a tag that marked you as approved. It could be symbolic, a ritual scent burned into a pendant. Either way, I did not have it. The scavenger captain stepped in. He is new, he said. Came from the outer holds. The clerk leaned close and sniffed. His eyes widened a fraction. For a heartbeat, I thought I was finished. Then the clerk's expression softened into something like pleasure. Interesting, he whispered. He lowered the wand. Go. I backed away, careful not to hurry. As we left, I heard him speak into a Vox unit. Possible fresh note. Inform the Pale Cantor. So that was it. The guard at the lift had not missed me. The Militarum clerk had not missed me. They were choosing to watch. They were hunting, but with patience. By end of shift, the scavengers returned to their berth. They collapsed on the floor, exhausted. One asked about the two taken for the choir. No one answered. I waited until the others slept, then rose. My route had to change. The ledger of canticles would not be kept on low decks. Too valuable. Too dangerous. It would be near the ship's heart, where the noise became doctrine and the crew became offerings. To reach it, I needed access tokens and a map. Not a real map. A living map built from warnings and corridors that stayed open. I slipped out, moving with the ship's own rhythm. When the bell tones shifted, I moved. When the chimes rang, I froze. When the sudden silence fell, I held my breath and counted to 10. At a junction near the vent the boys had used, I found a thin woman leaning against the wall, eyes half closed. A trader. Her wrists were wrapped in cloth. Her fingers twitched as if keeping time with music only she could hear. I offered her a ration bar. She sniffed it, then laughed. That is not enough, she said. I offered her a small vial of coolant I had stolen from the work cart. Her eyes sharpened. That is closer, she said. What do you want? A route, I murmured. Up deck. Quiet route. She studied me. You are not crew. My throat tightened. I kept my face blank. She shrugged. No one is crew. Everyone is prey. Pay and I will speak." I handed her the vial. She leaned in and whispered, "Service spine. Behind the heat exchangers. Follow the bone paint until it ends. When the bone paint ends, follow the smell of flowers. If you smell honey, you are dead. Do not go near the gold line. If you see the white mask, bow and keep walking. The 9th hour is when the walls listen. Do not talk then." I nodded. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "There will be a celebration cycle soon. When the ship wins, it feeds. When it feeds, the ledger moves." "How do you know?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "I clean the room where they sing about it. Open loop. Celebration cycle. Ledger moves." I returned to the berth and waited for the right bell tone. When it came, I left again, this time heading for the service spine. The spine was a narrow corridor behind machinery, hot enough that sweat ran down my back within minutes. Pipes thudded with coolant flow. Fans roared. The sound was honest, mechanical, almost comforting. Then the flowers began. At first it was faint, a clean scent, out of place amid oil and metal. It grew stronger the higher I climbed. The walls here had been painted with pale blossoms. Someone had taken time to make them beautiful. That was the worst part. Beauty on a chaos ship is never a gift, it is a lure. I came to a hatch marked with a teardrop symbol. My hand went to my pocket. The pale metal coin, stamped with the same mark. Silence window. I had not meant to use it yet, but the air beyond the hatch vibrated with distant sound, not loud, but layered, like a choir warming up. I pressed the coin into a slot beside the hatch. The slot drank it. The hatch clicked. For 1 minute, the corridor beyond went quiet. Not empty quiet, a muffled quiet, like the world wrapped in cloth. I slipped through. The hatch shut behind me. The slot flashed red. The coin was gone. 1 minute of quiet. Bought and spent. Ahead, the ship opened into a wider passage lined with alcoves. In each alcove hung a mask. Some were smiling. Some were weeping. Some had no mouths at all. I moved fast. The quiet did not last. I could feel it leaking away. At the end of the passage was a stairwell. Above it, a sign in Gothic. Audition halls. The quiet snapped like a wire. Sound rushed back in, and with it, whispers that were almost words. "Welcome. Fresh note. Come closer." I did not look at the masks. I did not answer the whispers. I started up the stairs, toward the halls where the ship's daily life became a performance. And somewhere above, a voice began to sing my borrowed name as if it belonged to them. The first time I heard my name sung by strangers, I nearly broke cover. It came from a vent above the stairwell, soft and precise, like someone practicing scales. The voice repeated the name in different tones, testing how it sounded, bending it, sweetening it. It was not a hunt in the way I understood hunting. It was more like tasting. I kept climbing. The audition level was warmer than the service spine, filled with perfume and stale sweat. Doors lined the corridor, each one carved with ornate symbols and fitted with locks that looked decorative, not secure. Through some doors came laughter. Through others came sobbing. Through one came nothing at all, yet the hair on my arms rose as if a storm approached. I moved past them, following the rule the trader had given me. Bone paint, then flowers. The bone paint was gone here, replaced by tiles that gleamed like polished teeth. The smell of flowers clung to everything. It was everywhere, which meant it was no longer guidance. It was a warning. A patrol approached, 3 armsmen with helms off, faces painted. They walked in time with distant music, each step part of a ritual. Behind them rolled a servitor pushing a cart stacked with folded fabric. Not fabric, skin. I corrected myself instantly. The thought rose uninvited and I buried it. Speculation is panic in disguise. I pressed against a wall, becoming a shadow. The patrol passed without looking, then the servitor's head snapped toward me. Its eyes were bright lenses, not human. It rolled to a stop. Its Vox grill clicked. The patrol stopped too. One armsman turned slowly, seeing what the servitor had seen. I felt my pulse at last. Not fast. Heavy. The armsman walked up to me and tilted his head, as if considering which angle of my face would look best in a frame. "You are lost," he said. I forced my voice into the scavenger tone. "Work order. Militarum. He smiled. Militarum is below. This is the throat. His hand rose, not to strike, but to touch my collar. I held still. He sniffed. Close enough that his breath warmed my skin. His eyes widened slightly, the same reaction as the clerks in the annex. Then he laughed. Fresh, he murmured. You should have a chain. He stepped back and gestured to a hook on the wall. Hanging from it were necklaces, each made of linked metal rings, each ring etched with tiny runes. Scent chains. Take one, he said. If you are seen without it, you will be taken for training. Training was a word that could mean anything here. I reached for a chain and slipped it over my head. The metal was cool at first, then it warmed like it had been waiting for skin. The armsman's smile widened. Good. Now you look like you belong. Belonging was the most dangerous thing anyone could offer me. He leaned close, voice turning conspiratorial. If you hear the 9th hour, close your eyes. The walls like to watch. Then he walked on, leaving me with a chain I had not earned. Someone was still deciding what to do with me, not whether, what. I moved on, faster now, keeping to service doors and side passages. The chain made a faint chiming sound when I moved. I hated it. It announced my presence, yet it also marked me as prey that had been tagged, a difference the ship respected. Ahead, the corridor widened into a gallery. A vaulted space lit by hanging lanterns that glowed softly, each lantern shaped like a heart. Statues lined the walls. Some were saints made obscene, some were Astartes in armor, faces hidden behind smooth visors, posed like performers on a stage. At the center stood a pillar of mirrored glass. In its reflection I saw myself, distorted, taller, thinner, more confident. The mirror did not show my tired eyes, it showed a version that wanted to be seen. I broke eye contact at once. Open loop, the mirror pillar. It was not decoration, it was a trap. At the far end of the gallery was a door guarded by a single figure in pale armor. Not full power armor, but plates shaped like it, worn by a mortal in imitation. A high-ranking attendant, his helm was a white mask. The pale cantor. He stood with hands clasped, posture calm, as if he could wait forever. Beside him floated a servo skull with a tray of small vials. The vials contained liquid that shimmered like light. 2 armsmen approached him and bowed. He spoke to them in a low voice. They nodded and left, drinking from the vials as they walked. Their steps became lighter, their smiles broader, their discipline fell away like an old coat. I could not go near him. Not yet. I turned down a side passage, looking for the service spine again. The trader's route was not meant to take me through the ship's heart. It was meant to keep me alive long enough to sell another vial. The passage descended and narrowed, then split. One branch smelled of flowers. The other smelled faintly of honey. Honey means dead. I chose flowers. The path led to a maintenance alcove with a half-open hatch. Inside, machinery hummed. A coil of cabling lay on the floor like a sleeping snake. A tech servitor knelt by an open panel, its fingers moving with careful precision. It did not look up. I slipped inside and closed the hatch behind me. The servitor's humming shifted into a new tune. It was almost a warning. I scanned the panel. The wiring was not standard. It had been braided, decorated. The circuits had tiny charms tied to them. The machine spirit here had been treated like a pet, coaxed and tempted. I found a data port. I took out my slate and connected. The slate flickered. A cascade of symbols flowed across the screen. Some were Gothic. Some were something else, shapes that made my eyes sting. I forced myself to focus. I was trained for this, not for the warp, but for lies built into systems. The port gave me a schematic of the deck. Not complete, fragments, still enough to orient. The ledger of canticles was stored on deck 12, near the ship's shrine arrays and command spines. That made sense. Ledgers are power. Power sits close to those who think they deserve it. The route from here to deck 12 was blocked by security zones. Some were mechanical. Some were labeled right locks. Right locks meant keys made of behavior, not metal. I disconnected and backed away. The servitor finally looked up. Its face was a mask, smooth and blank. Its eyes were tiny camera lenses. It tilted its head. Then it held out a small object. A pass token. Teardrop stamp. I stared. The servitor's vox clicked. Once, twice. Then it spoke in a voice that was not its own, a voice filtered and faint. "Silence is rare," it said. "Spend it well." Then the servitor returned to its work. I took the token and left. Someone was feeding me tools. Someone on this ship wanted me to reach Deck 12. That was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern. I moved up again, keeping to maintenance routes. The ship's sounds grew more complex. Metal groans beneath layered music, chanting, the distant thump of something like drums. Then, a sudden absence of sound. The 9th hour, my slate's clock, crude and stolen, ticked forward. The air turned thick, like a room holding its breath. I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I felt the walls move. Not physically. Something pressed at the edge of my mind, curious, tasting, searching for a thought to latch onto. I did not give it one. I pictured a blank page. I pictured a closed door. I pictured nothing. A whisper slid through my mind anyway. Fresh note. I held still until the 9th hour passed, and the ship exhaled into noise again. When I opened my eyes, I saw marks on the corridor walls that had not been there before. Small, wet handprints. They faded as I watched, dissolving into the paint. I did not ask what made them. At a junction near Deck 20, I saw a group of crew clustered around a vent. They whispered urgently, passing a strip of wax from hand to hand. One looked up and saw me. He froze, eyes wide. Then he made a sign, 2 fingers pressed to his throat. Silence. He mouthed one word. Cycle. Celebration cycle. The crew scattered as a bell tone rang, bright and sharp. A corridor-clearing chime followed, soft and beautiful. The kind of sound you might play in a chapel if you wanted worshippers to cry. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured, Astartes. I pressed into a maintenance recess and waited. They came into view, 3 Emperor's children in full power armor, plates polished to a sheen that caught every lumen strip and broke it into color. Their armor was adorned with trophies and icons, not the crude spikes of other warbands. These were curated, arranged, chosen for aesthetic. Even their cruelty was styled. Between them walked a mortal carrying a velvet case. His hands shook. He kept his eyes down. One of the Astartes spoke, voice purring through his helm vox. "The ship will sing tonight," he said. "Ensure the canticles are ready." The mortal nodded, barely managing it. Another Astartes laughed. "If they are not ready, we will make them ready." They walked on, leaving behind a scent like flowers crushed under a boot. Canticles. The ledger's name was not just a title. It was a function. A record of songs, rites, indulgences. A book that fed the ship's culture. I waited until their footsteps faded, then moved. Deck 12 was still far, but now I knew the timing. The celebration cycle was imminent. The ledger would be moved. That meant opportunity. It also meant the ship's attention would be focused. Attention is lethal, but it is also directional. If everyone watches the stage, you can move behind the curtains. I needed one more thing. A disguise that belonged up deck. The scavenger suit would not survive scrutiny near command levels. I needed robes, tokens, something that said attendant or scribe. I found my chance in a side chamber labeled in Gothic, vestment storage. Inside, racks of robes hung in neat rows. Some were beautiful, some were stained. All of them carried scent, the ship's signature, like a seal. I chose a robe that looked like a scribe's, dark fabric with subtle embroidery. I slipped it over my void suit. The cloth was soft, almost comforting. Then it tightened slightly around my shoulders, like it was adjusting to fit. I swallowed. On a shelf I found masks. Not full masks, small half masks that covered the eyes and nose, each painted with a different expression. Smiling, crying, neutral. I chose neutral. I put it on. For a moment, the world changed. The sounds seemed clearer. The air tasted sharper. My skin tingled as if the ship had accepted the costume, or as if it had claimed it. I left the chamber and moved toward the service lifts that climbed to Deck 12. At the lift junction, a guard stopped me, hand raised. "Chain," he said. I lifted the scent chain, letting it chime once. He nodded and waved me through, bored. As the lift rose, I felt the ship's vibration change. Higher decks had different hums, cleaner power lines, more stable gravitic plates. Command levels are built to last, even in heresy. The doors opened onto Deck 12. The air here was almost pleasant. Less sweat, less oil, more incense, more controlled. The corridors were wider, walls covered in tapestries depicting battles as performances. Astartes posed like artists. Mortals knelt like audience. I walked with purpose now, head slightly bowed, like someone with a task. Confidence is also a costume. Then a voice behind me spoke. New robe. I stopped. The pale Cantor stepped into view, white mask gleaming, his presence making the corridor feel smaller. I do not know you, he said softly. My throat tightened. My mind raced. He lifted a hand and touched the air near my face, not quite touching me. His fingers traced a shape like a note on a staff. The scent chain chimed. He tilted his head, listening. Fresh, he whispered, almost pleased. Tonight will be interesting. He stepped aside, letting me pass. As I walked away, he spoke again, barely audible. The ledger moves at the first chorus. Do not be late. He knew. He was guiding me, and if he was guiding me, then my mission was no longer just theft. It was participation. I walked on, mask hiding my expression, heart heavy in my chest. Ahead, the corridor split toward shrine arrays and command spines. Somewhere beyond those doors, the ledger of canticles waited, and the ship was already clearing its halls for the celebration. Deck 12 felt like a theater before the curtain rose. Servants moved in quiet lines, carrying candles, polished instruments, and trays of vials. Not food, not ammunition, offerings. Attendants adjusted banners, smoothing fabric as if wrinkles were a sin. A pair of tech servitors tuned a bank of Vox speakers, their fingers moving with delicate speed. Every action was precise, rehearsed. If you did not know better, you might think this was discipline. I kept walking, following the flow. The trick was to move like you belonged to the rhythm. When the servants stopped, I stopped. When they bowed to passing Astartes, I bowed. When they avoided a certain doorway, I avoided it too. A door ahead bore the same teardrop mark as my tokens. Beside it was a slot, coin-shaped, right lock. I had one token left, the one the servitor had handed me in the maintenance alcove. I could spend it here, or I could save it for the escape. A choice between access and survival. I watched two attendants approach the door. One offered a coin token. The slot flashed green. The other offered a chain, not a coin. The slot flashed red, and a thin chime rang. Guards appeared from side passages and escorted the attendant away without force. He did not resist. His face was calm, as if he had expected this. Rule confirmed. Right locks were not only locks. They were filters. I waited until the guards left, then moved up and pressed my coin into the slot. The slot drank it. The door side open. Inside was a narrow passage that descended into a cooler, darker part of the deck. The smell of flowers faded. The smell of old paper replaced it, sharp and dry. My eyes adjusted to soft lumen strips that illuminated shelves. A library, not the grand imperial kind with purity seals and sermons. This was a library built like a shrine, with books chained to lecterns and scrolls stored in bone tubes. Each shelf was labeled in careful Gothic, the script ornate. A record keeper's pride. I stepped inside and the door closed behind me. The silence here was not the ship's silence. It was controlled, protected. Even the whispers behind vents were muted, as if reluctant to intrude. At the far end of the library stood a dais with a single lectern. On the lectern lay a book bound in black, its cover adorned with metal studs arranged like notes on a staff. A chain wrapped around it, thick as a wrist, anchored to the lectern with a lock shaped like a mouth. The Ledger of Canticles. It was smaller than I expected, not a giant tome, not a relic that needed two men to lift. It was portable by design, because it moved with the ship's rites. It was meant to be carried like a holy text. I approached slowly, heart pounding now, despite my discipline. I had reached the objective, yet my hands did not move. Something about the ledger felt like a loaded weapon that could fire without being touched. I crouched and examined the lock. Not mechanical. A small rune plate sat beside it. A sensor, perhaps. A recognition charm. My slate could not break a charm like this. Not without time. Not without tripping alarms. Then, As if the ship enjoyed irony, the answer arrived without effort. A hidden panel in the wall slid open and a servitor rolled out, carrying a tray. On the tray lay keys. Not metal keys. Keys made of bone, carved with symbols. One key was stamped with a teardrop. The servitor stopped beside me and held out the tray. I stared. Its vox clicked once, then spoke in that borrowed voice again. First chorus, it said. Preparation. The celebration cycle was already shifting resources. Keys were being staged. The ledger would be unchained soon. I could take the key now and leave with the ledger before the cycle. Or I could wait and move with the right, stealing it amid motion. The first option risked alarms. The second risked being close to Astartes during a rite. A third option existed, one I did not like. I could copy the ledger instead of stealing it. Take the data, not the object. But my handlers wanted the physical book because symbols matter. They wanted proof and leverage, not a story. I reached for the teardrop key. The servitor's head tilted slightly, as if watching my choice with curiosity. I lifted the key and slid it into the lock shaped like a mouth. The lock shuddered, then opened with a wet click. The chain loosened. I held my breath and lifted the ledger from the lectern. The weight was modest. The sensation was not. The cover felt warm, as if it had been held recently, as if it wanted to be held again. The moment my fingers closed around it, a sound rose faintly through the walls. A choir gathering. The first chorus was beginning. I tucked the ledger into the inner pouch beneath my robe, close to my ribs. The book pressed against me like a heartbeat. I turned to leave. The door did not open. My coin token was gone. The door required a token to open from this side too. Right locks, filters in both directions. Panic tried to rise. I crushed it. I searched the tray again. No more teardrop keys. Only bone keys carved with other symbols, some of which made my eyes itch. The servitor's tray had a second slot, smaller. A slot for a chain. I understood then. This was why the armsman had forced a scent chain on me. The chain was not only camouflage. It was a key, but one that worked only when paired with a coin. The coin had opened the door. The chain could now open it again, but at a cost. I lifted the scent chain and pressed its clasp into the slot. The chain chimed. The door shuddered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and with it came sound, loud and layered, like waves of music pressing down corridors. I stepped out and the door closed again, sealing the library behind me. The corridor outside had changed. Servants moved faster. Lanterns glowed brighter. Incense thickened the air. The celebration was not a single event. It was an entire ship shifting into a different mode. The first chorus had begun. I needed to leave deck 12 before the second chorus, before attention sharpened. I turned toward the lift junction. A figure stepped into my path. The pale Cantor. Up close, his mask was smooth porcelain, flawless. His robe was stitched with tiny bells that did not ring as he moved, as if the sound obeyed him. His hands were bare. His fingers were long and delicate. He looked like an artist, not a killer. "Did you find what you wanted?" he asked softly. My mouth went dry. I kept my voice even. "I have duties." He smiled, though the mask did not change. The smile was in his posture. "Your duties are my duties tonight," he said. "Walk." He turned and began to move. His attendants fell in behind him. Without thinking, I fell in too. It was safer than resisting. Safety was relative, but it mattered. We walked down a corridor toward a wide archway. Beyond it lay a hall filled with people, not just crew, not just attendants. A mass of mortals gathered in rows, faces masked, bodies swaying. Above them, on balconies, stood Astartes, emperor's children, watching like nobles at a play. Their armor caught the light and broke it into shimmering colors. Some held goblets, some held instruments. One leaned on a spear that looked ceremonial, its blade polished like a mirror. At the center of the hall was a stage. On the stage, servitors arranged vox pylons, speakers shaped like organ pipes. A choir of mortals knelt before them, heads bowed, hands bound together with ribbon. They were not fighting. They were waiting. The pale Cantor guided me along the edge of the hall, toward a side door. "The ledger moves," he said. "It will be presented at the second chorus." You will be near it, because I want you near it. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. He stopped and turned his mask toward me. Because you are a note the ship has not heard, he whispered, and the ship is hungry for new notes. He resumed walking. My mind churned. My handlers had not warned me about this. They had planned for guards and locks, for patrols and rights. They had not planned for a ship that treated infiltration like a performance. Open loop, closed partially. They knew I was here. They wanted me here. We reached a side chamber filled with racks of masks and robes. A dressing room for the right. Attendants adjusted my robe, smoothing it, tying a sash around my waist. Their hands moved confidently, as if dressing strangers was normal. One pressed a vial to my lips. "Drink," she said. I shook my head. Her eyes hardened. "Drink." The pale cantor watched, silent. I could not refuse without drawing attention. Attention is lethal. I lifted the vial and sipped. The liquid tasted like flowers and metal. It warmed my throat, then spread through my chest like a slow fire. My senses sharpened. The hall's music became clearer, each note distinct. The smell of incense became almost visible, curling like smoke patterns. My skin prickled, as if the air itself touched me. I steadied myself. Enhanced senses are useful. They are also a trap, because they make you crave more. The pale cantor spoke, voice gentle. "Do not drown. Float." Then a bell tone rang, higher than before. Second chorus. The hall's crowd hushed. The choir on the stage lifted their heads. The vox pylons thrummed. A sound rose, not a melody, a layered chord that made bones vibrate. An Astartes stepped onto the stage, an Emperor's Children officer, his armor pristine. He carried a velvet case, the same kind I had seen earlier. He opened it and lifted out a slim book, not the ledger. A decoy, perhaps, or another record. The crowd sighed as if in worship. Then another Astartes appeared, this one taller, armor adorned with a crest shaped like a blade. He raised a hand, and the sound shifted. A side door opened, and attendants carried forward a lectern on which rested the real object, the Ledger of Canticles. My stomach dropped. I had stolen the ledger from the library. Yet here it was, presented openly. Either I had stolen the wrong book, or the ship had duplicates, or the ship was playing a game with mirrors. The mirror pillar from the gallery flashed in my memory. Reflections. Copies. Distortions. The pale cantor leaned close. "You took the shell," he whispered. "The song remains here." My hands went cold. My pouch held something, yes. A physical ledger, warm against my ribs. But the ship had kept the true power, the active record, on stage. The book I carried was a copy, a lure, a test. My warband wanted leverage. A copy might still be useful. It might contain names, debts, routes. Yet if it was a shell, it might also carry a trap, a tag. Now the choice became urgent. Option 1. Flee now, with the shell, before the rite ends. Survive, and deliver something, even if incomplete. Option 2. Stay. Attempt to steal the true ledger from the stage amid the crowd, risking Astartes' attention and death. The second option was madness, but the first option might doom me anyway if the shell carried a tag and the ship had already tasted my note. If they wanted me to leave, it would be for a reason. The choir's sound rose, louder, making the crowd sway. The Astartes officer placed his hand on the ledger and spoke words I did not understand, but the meaning was clear. Invocation, ownership, claim. The crowd answered with a murmur that became a roar. The ship fed on it. I felt the pouch against my ribs pulse once, like a second heart. The shell was alive. The pale cantor stepped back, giving me space, as if he expected a performance. My mind flashed to the honey corridor. Dead. The trader's warning. The silence window coin. Spent. The second token. Spent. My scent chain, now used as a key. My disguises, now known. The safe route was gone. Only choices remained. A sudden klaxon blared through the hall, harsh and ugly, cutting across the choir's cord like a blade. Not part of the rite. The crowd froze. The Astartes turned their helms toward the ceiling, listening. Another sound followed, deeper. Impact. The ship shuddered. A boarding alarm. For one wild moment, I hoped it was Imperial. Salvation through enemies. Then Vox speakers crackled with a voice filled with laughter. Red Corsairs, someone hissed nearby. Rival chaos. Another warband, hungry, desperate. A second predator entering the theater. The Emperor's children did not look afraid. They looked excited. The officer on stage laughed. "Let them come," he purred. "The third chorus will be loud." The crowd erupted, half in panic, half in worship. The celebration had become a battle, and in the chaos, the true ledger sat on a lectern in plain sight, guarded by ritual, pride, and now the promise of violence. I tightened my grip on my robe and moved toward the stage. If I was going to die, it would be with the real weapon in my hands. The first shots of the boarding fight did not sound like bolters. They sounded like drums, deep and rhythmic, echoing through the ship's frame. Each impact made the lanterns sway. The crowd in the hall swayed too, as if the violence was part of the music. Servants scattered, clearing space with practiced speed. Astartes moved to balconies, taking firing positions without urgency. The Emperor's children treated war as choreography. That was their danger. I slipped into the shifting mass of mortals, using their panic as cover. Masks bumped masks, robes tangled. Someone screamed, then laughed, then screamed again. Incense burned thicker, mingling with the sharp smell of ozone as power conduits switched states. I kept my eyes on the stage. The lectern with the true ledger was now flanked by 2 Astartes in ornate armor. Not a full honor guard, but enough to make theft suicidal. Yet the ritual had created its own constraints. They could not simply drag the ledger away without breaking the rite. Pride held it in place. A second door to the hall burst open, and armsmen poured in, escorting wounded crew. Blood spattered the tile. The crowd gasped. Some reached out to touch the blood like it was holy. That made my skin crawl more than the violence itself. A Vox speaker crackled. "Boarders on deck 15. Multiple breaches. Contain and harvest. Harvest." The word was spoken like a promise. Red Corsairs would be coming down. They would fight for loot, for slaves, for supplies. They would not respect the rite. They would not pause for a chorus. They would crash into the hall and turn theater into slaughter. That could be my chance. Chaos is a tool, if you can shape it. I edged closer to the stage, keeping low. I passed a servant who was handing out wax strips, the same earwax traders used. The servant pressed one toward me without looking. I took it and shoved it into my pocket. Useful later. A sharp note rang from above. "Noise Marines." I had not seen them yet, but you do not mistake their presence. The air itself began to vibrate in patterns that made my stomach twist. A high whine layered over the choir's chord. The crowd moaned, not in pain, in something like devotion. If the Noise Marines played, mortals would drop like puppets. Not always dead, sometimes worse. I could not let my senses drown. "Float," the pale cantor had said. "Do not drown." I found a side stair and climbed to a lower balcony, closer to the stage's flank. From here I could see behind the lectern a narrow service walkway, guarded only by a single attendant and a servo skull. A rout. The attendant was mortal, wearing a half mask. His hands shook as he held a ceremonial staff. He looked terrified, but he did not move. Fear was part of his role. The servo skull drifted, scanning the hall. I needed a distraction that would not point at me. The boarding impacts grew closer. Bolter fire began to crack, sharp and familiar now. Shouts echoed in Gothic and Void cant. A scream cut off abruptly. Then the side door burst inward, and a group of red corsairs charged into the hall, armor red and black, chains hanging. They fired into the air, roaring. Their leader raised a chain axe and bellowed a challenge. The crowd screamed. Some fled. Some surged toward the borders like worshippers. The Emperor's children on the balconies finally moved with speed, firing down. Bolter rounds hammered into the red corsairs. 2 fell. Another kept moving, laughing. The leader pointed at the stage. "Loot the shrine," he roared. His warriors pushed forward, cutting through mortals like a ship through surf. The hall became a storm. In that storm, no one would notice one more masked attendant slipping along a balcony. I moved. I dropped down to the service walkway behind the lectern. The attendant turned, eyes wide. He opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. The 9th hour rule, the walls listen. Even now, people feared silence and sound. I stepped close and whispered one simple lie. Cantor orders. His shoulders sagged in relief. He nodded and stepped aside, eager to obey authority, any authority. The servo skull drifted toward me, its lens focusing. I raised my scent chain and let it chime once, like a badge. The skull paused, then moved on. I reached the lectern. The ledger sat on it like a sleeping animal. The cover was not plain black like the shell I carried. This one was bound in leather that shimmered, as if woven from light. The studs were arranged in patterns that made my eyes water. A chain wrapped around it, but thinner than in the library. Ritual chain, not security chain. It could be lifted off if you knew the gesture. I watched the Astartes on either side of the lectern. Their attention was on the hall, firing at the red corsairs. They were confident no one would dare touch the ledger. Confidence creates blind spots. I lifted my hand and mimicked the gesture I had seen the pale Cantor trace in the air earlier. A note shape. A claim. The chain loosened. The ledger's cover warmed beneath my fingers. I lifted it. For a heartbeat, the entire hall's sound shifted. The choir's chord faltered. The lanterns flickered. A taste of silence swept through, thin and sharp. Then the noise marines began to play. The sound was not a song. It was a weaponized sensation. A wave that pushed into flesh and bone, vibrating organs, making teeth ache. Mortals fell. Some clutched their heads. Some laughed and screamed at once. The red corsairs staggered, then fired wildly. The Emperor's children laughed, delighted. Their war was art. I shoved the wax strip into my ear, then the other. It did not block everything, but it dulled the worst edge. My balance steadied. I tucked the true ledger into my inner pouch and felt its weight settle, heavier than it should be. The shell ledger pressed against it from the other side, like two magnets. My pouch felt crowded with doom. An Astartes voice roared behind me. Thief. I turned. One of the lectern guards had noticed. He had stopped firing. His helm turned toward me like a predator scenting blood. My disguise was dead. My mission was now a chase. I ran. I leapt off the service walkway into the curtain space behind the stage, landing hard, pain shooting up my leg. I did not slow. Pain is information, not command. Behind me, the Astartes vaulted after me, heavy armor cracking tile. His laughter was amplified through Vox. He was enjoying this. The backstage corridor was narrow, lined with cables and storage crates. I sprinted, robe flapping, mask still on my face. The air tasted of incense and ozone and now blood. A door ahead bore the teardrop mark again. Right lock. No coin, no token, only my scent chain. I slammed into the door and pressed the chain clasp into the slot. The slot flashed red. Wrong. The chain alone was not enough. The Astartes was close now, footsteps shaking the floor. I ripped the chain off my neck and jammed it into the slot again, deeper, twisting. The slot sparked. A chime rang. Angry. Then the door opened, not smoothly, but like something forced. I fell through, and the door slammed behind me. The corridor beyond was dark and smelled faintly of honey. Dead corridor. My breath caught. The trader's warning returned too late. But the chase had pushed me here. The safe route was gone. The corridor's walls were painted gold. Not the gold line she had warned me about, but full gold panels, polished enough to reflect movement. The mirror pillar's cousin. In the reflections, I saw myself running, but the reflections lagged by a fraction of a second, not a trick of light. A delay like a thought catching up. The air vibrated with distant music, but here it sounded muffled, like the ship was holding it back. Behind me, the door shook as the Astartes struck it. I ran deeper, because forward was the only direction left. At the end of the gold corridor was a circular chamber with a pit in the center. The pit was covered by a mesh grate. Beneath it glowed soft light, and from below came voices singing in perfect harmony, quiet and relentless. The chamber's walls were covered in mirrors, the mirror vault, open loop returning. I skidded to a stop, chest heaving. A side passage branched off, marked with Gothic script, Apothecarian Annex. Another branch led downward, marked simply, Choir. The singing from below rose slightly, as if aware of my presence. I had to choose. Two bad options. Apothecarian annex might lead to med bays, supply lines, perhaps a route to service lifts. But it might also be full of Astartes and their attendants, and I was now an obvious intruder. Choir route led downward into whatever fed the singing. That sounded like death. Behind me, the door finally cracked open. The Astartes forced his way through, armor scraping. He stepped into the mirror vault and looked around, amused. He saw me and smiled. "Run," he purred. "I enjoy the chase." My fingers tightened over the pouch where the ledgers pressed against my ribs. The true one felt like a blade. The shell felt like a hook. I chose the Apothecarian annex. I sprinted down the side passage and heard the Astartes laugh as he followed. The Apothecarian annex was colder, air-filtered, smelling of antiseptic and incense. The corridor walls were marked with symbols that suggested pain wrapped in beauty. Lamps glowed white, harsh and clean. It almost felt like an imperial med bay. Almost. Servitors moved in the corridor carrying trays of instruments. A robed attendant looked up and froze at the sight of an armed Astartes chasing a masked mortal. The attendant opened his mouth to shout an alarm. The Astartes threw a combat knife with lazy precision. The attendant fell, blood spreading across the clean tile. I did not look back. No time. No repetition of horror. Move. Ahead, a lift shaft. I slammed the call rune. The lift did not come. The runes flickered, then went dark. Power reroute, boarding damage, or deliberate lockdown. The Astartes closed in, footsteps heavy. In desperation, I dove into a side room. It was an operating chamber. A body lay on the table, strapped down, not dead. Eyes wide, pleading. A servitor leaned over them with a tool in its hand. The tool hummed softly. The servitor looked up at me, then at the Astartes, then back at me. It tilted its head, then it spoke in that borrowed voice again, clear despite the chaos. "Exit behind the third cabinet," it said. "You are expected." Expected. The ship was still guiding me, even now. I ran to the third cabinet, yanked it open, and found a narrow crawl space behind it. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders. The cabinet shut behind me with a soft click, guided by servitor hands. The Astartes entered the room, laughing. He spoke to the servitor. "Where did it go?" The servitor did not answer. The Astartes' laughter stopped. Then I heard a sound through the wall, a wet cracking noise, followed by a satisfied sigh. I crawled faster, throat tight, mind refusing to picture what happened in that room. Platform-safe darkness. Implied, not shown. The crawl space led to a maintenance tunnel that sloped downward. The air grew hotter. The smell of honey faded, replaced by oil and smoke. The service spine again. My chest loosened slightly. I had returned to a place that felt honest, but my scent chain was gone, jammed into a right lock. My coins were gone, spent. My disguise was compromised, and I carried 2 ledgers that felt like living things pressed against my ribs. I ran down the service spine toward the lower decks, toward the docking bays, toward escape. Behind me, somewhere above, the Emperor's children laughed and sang and fought. The celebration cycle had become a feeding frenzy, and I had stolen the ship's song. Escape should have been the simplest part. It never is. The service spine shook with new impacts as the boarding fight spread. Bulkheads groaned. Warning runes flashed along pipes. Steam hissed from a ruptured vent and scalded my arm. I bit back a cry and kept moving. The only thing worse than pain is noise that draws attention. My slate displayed a map fragment that flickered with static. Deck numbers scrambled as power failed and rerouted. I had memorized enough to navigate blind, yet the ship kept changing the rules. Corridors that had been open were now sealed. Doors that had required tokens now hung ajar like mouths left open in surprise. I reached a junction where the bone paint path should have been. It was gone, scraped away. In its place was a thin gold line running down the corridor. "Do not step on the gold line," the trader had warned. The gold line glittered, calling to the eye. It looked like safety, like guidance, the kind of line you follow in a panic. That was the trap. I stepped over it, careful, choosing the grimy edge of the corridor instead. My boots landed on bare metal. The ship vibrated underfoot as if annoyed. A figure emerged from a side passage. A mortal armsman, helm off, face painted. He raised his gun, then hesitated when he saw my robe and mask. His eyes flicked to my neck, searching for the scent chain. No chain. His hand tightened on the trigger. "Stop," he said. I could have lied. I could have pretended authority. But without the chain, the lie would crumble. So I did the other thing infiltration training teaches you. I told the truth. The smallest truth. "Borders," I said, voice tight. "I am running." His eyes darted, hearing distant bolt of fire. He wavered, fear fighting duty. Then he made a mistake. He looked at the gold line. His gaze lingered a fraction too long. The line shimmered. The armsman's face softened, then turned blank. He lowered his gun and stepped onto the gold line as if answering a call. I watched in horror as the line seemed to drink his attention. His posture changed. He began to hum, the same warm-up tune I had heard from vents. His eyes rolled back slightly, smile widening. The corridor walls, barely visible behind pipes, seemed to lean inward. I backed away, stepping further from the line. The armsman turned toward me, smile too wide now. He lifted his gun again, but not to shoot, to offer it, like a gift. "Join," he whispered. I ran. Behind me, the humming rose into a soft chorus. The ship used the gold line like a lure, drawing bodies into its ritual systems. A security measure built from obsession. I reached the lower decks, and the air changed again, back to sweat and oil and fear. The familiar stink of mortals trying to survive. Servitors rolled past carrying crates of ammunition and candles in the same cart, as if war and worship were the same supply chain. A group of scavengers huddled by a vent, the same group I had seen earlier. Their eyes widened as they saw me. One recognized the robe, the mask, the wrongness. "You went up," he whispered. "You do not come back from up." I pushed past them. Then I heard my borrowed name again, sung softly, close to my ear. Not from a vent, from behind me. I spun and saw the pale Cantor standing in the corridor, white mask gleaming even in low light. He should not have been down here. Yet he moved as if every deck belonged to him. Around him, the air felt quieter, not silent, controlled. His bells still did not ring. "You have the song," he said. I kept backing away. "Let me go." He tilted his head. "Why would I?" "Because the borders," I said, trying to use the chaos as leverage. "Your ship is under attack." The pale Cantor's posture did not change. "It is always under attack. That is why it is alive." He stepped closer. My hand went to the pouch, feeling the ledgers press against my ribs. The true ledger felt heavy, real. The shell felt warm, almost eager. "You have two," he said softly, as if pleased by my confusion. "One is ink, one is breath." I swallowed. "Which one is the trap?" He laughed, the sound like a single note. "Both." He lifted a hand and traced a shape in the air, the same note, gesture. The corridor's whispers leaned in. "Your warband wants leverage," he said. "They will read names, debts, roots. They will think they are clever." He stepped closer, so close I could smell incense and something metallic. "But the ship wanted a messenger," he whispered. "It wanted its music carried out, so others could hear it, so others could answer." My stomach turned. A tag, not a physical tracker, not a beacon on a slate. A mimetic infection. A ritual mark carried through words and attention. A song that spreads when you speak of it, when you show it. The pale Cantor tapped my mask lightly. "You will leave," he said. "You will run. You will bring the ledger to your masters." "Why?" I asked again, voice cracking. "Because they will open it," he said. "And when they do, the ship will know their names." My hands shook. I forced them still. The corridor behind him flickered with distant light as alarms pulsed. A scream echoed, cut off. The boarding fight was still raging, yet here, time felt slow. I considered killing him. A knife to the throat. A shot. But he was not alone. The ship itself seemed to lean around him. If I attacked, I would become a note, loud and obvious. And he wanted me alive. That was the worst part. I made my choice. I ran. I sprinted past him, brushing his robe. He did not reach for me. He did not chase. He simply turned his mask to follow my movement, like a director watching an actor hit their mark. As I ran, his voice followed, soft and sure. "Tell them the canticles are ready." I reached the docking levels and found chaos. The bay where we had entered was now filled with smoke and bodies. Scavengers shouted, trying to reach their cutter. Armsmen fired at shapes in the haze. Servitors rolled through it all, still dragging chimes, still carrying incense, as if the ritual did not care who bled. A red corsair stood near the cutter ramp, chain axe dripping. He turned and saw me, mask and robe, and laughed. "Tribute," he barked, stepping toward me. I raised my hands, showing empty palms. "I am nothing." He lunged anyway. I ducked, grabbed a fallen lasgun from the deck, and fired once into his knee. The shot was sloppy, close range, but effective. He roared and stumbled. I did not wait. I sprinted up the ramp into the cutter. Inside, 2 scavengers were already there, terrified. They stared at my robe, my mask. "Fly," I snapped. One shook his head. "We cannot." "The bay clamps." I cursed and slammed my hand on the console. It was coded. Guild locks. I did not have time. Then the cutter's systems flickered, and the clamps released with a sudden jolt. The scavengers stared. I did not. The ship had opened the door. We launched into the bay, engines whining. Bolt-arounds sparked off the cutter's hull as we rose. A noise marine's cord rolled through the bay and made the cutter's panels vibrate. The scavengers screamed and clutched their ears. I pressed the wax deeper into mine and focused on the void ahead. The bay doors opened like an iris again, welcoming us out. As we cleared the ship, I looked back. The warship hung in the void, lanterns glowing, hull spires lit by the battle's flashes. Boarding craft clung to its sides like parasites. Yet the ship looked pleased, as if it had been fed. My slate chirped. A message, not from my handlers, not from my warband, from an unknown source. 3 words in Gothic script, fresh note delivered. My throat went dry. I tore the slate cable out and threw it across the cutter. It sparked and died. It did not matter. The message was not the threat. The fact it could reach me was. The cutter jumped to warp minutes later, guided by a route the scavenger captain had memorized. The Geller field flared, the void became a screaming colorless pressure, and reality bent. In the warp, the ship's whispers should have faded. They did not. In the corner of my vision, I saw lantern light that was not there. I smelled flowers when the cutter's air was stale. I heard a soft choir note beneath the Geller hum. The ledgers pressed against my ribs like 2 hearts. I reached into my pouch and pulled out the shell ledger first. Its cover was warm. When I opened it, the pages were not blank. They were filled with names and dates and debts written in elegant Gothic. Real data. Useful. A weapon. Then I turned a page and saw my borrowed name written there, in ink still wet. I slammed the book shut. My hands were shaking now. I hated that. I pulled out the true ledger. It did not open easily. The cover resisted like a living thing. When it finally gave, the pages inside were not ink. They were thin sheets of metal etched with patterns that looked like music. Each pattern seemed to shift when I looked away and back again. I did not read it. I could feel it reading me. I closed it and shoved both books back into the pouch, as if fabric could block a curse. In the hours that followed, the scavengers prayed, argued, sobbed. I sat against the cutter wall and stared at nothing, listening to the Geller fields hum. I thought of my warband. They would be waiting. They would take the ledgers, crack them open, read greedily. They would laugh at the Emperor's children and their theater. They would plan raids, betrayals, leverage. They would not understand that they had already been seen. That was the true horror you do not see in a story like this. Not the masks, not the incense, not even the violence. It is the way a ship can turn your mission into an invitation. We dropped out of warp at a dead moon where my warband kept a listening post. The cutter limped into the hangar. Armored figures approached, weapons ready. My handlers. I stepped down the ramp, robe torn, mask cracked. I handed over the pouch without a word. My handler, a veteran who had taught me how to disappear, smiled. "You have it," he said. I did not smile back. "Do not open it," I whispered. He laughed. "That is the point." He turned to walk away. As he did, the hangar lights flickered once, very softly, like a lantern swaying. A single choir note echoed through the bay, too quiet for most to notice. My handler paused, head tilting slightly, as if listening. Then he smiled wider, and in that smile, I saw the ship's hunger reflected back. The canticles had arrived. and the next celebration cycle had already begun.